Metal is just noise. This is a term that I feel like a lot of metalheads at one point or another have seen on some forum or blog post from a detractor, a hater, maybe someone that they know saying that it's all just noise, it's heaviness, there is no rhyme or reason or rhythm or compassion, it's not real art. There are so many different distinctions that you can hear attached to metal, and it kind of got me thinking last night as I was drifting off to sleep that I wanted to make a video talking about the deliberacy of noise in music and when metal becomes too heavy or when metal becomes just noise. Because the thing is, it's always going to be a subjective argument when a specific genre steps over the line and breaches past the point of what people think fit a specific criteria. But with that being said, can you approach a little bit of a subjective discussion with some objectivity? My answer is I'm going to attempt to. So take it from someone that likes pretty much every type of metal imaginable. I have listened to some very underground and despondent noise-driven metal projects, some extremely lo-fi black metal projects, so while it isn't necessarily always my cup of tea to listen to something that is just straight noise, I think that noise and distortion and feedback and layering, compression, equalization, these things have been key components for making metal sort of have this specific experimentation to test the limits, test the boundaries of what sound can be. And taking out of the equation noise music in its own right, which could be its entire own video and has its own rich history, especially like the Japanese noise scene, I think that metal has been the biggest genre to really test the limits of sound, of aggression, of how heavy and how loud and how noisy you can make something. And with specific genres priding themselves on testing these limits, whether it be brutal death metal, lo-fi black metal, noise metal, power violence, these are all genres that want to test the limits and challenge the conventions of normality. And of course, you'll always have these people that think that certain types of music are just noise because they don't fit the classical definitions of what music was intended to be. They think of music in the classical format. I mean that both literally and figuratively. Classical in terms of like operatic numbers as well as musical numbers from like the Beethovens and the Mozarts and that sort of thing, the Tchaikovskys, but also classical in how you define rhythm and pattern and composition, harmony, melody. And these things have been sort of the building blocks and foundation for a lot of people that want to say that certain genres just aren't music, whether you're talking about metal or noise music, certain forms of electronic music, certain hip-hop things get this sort of distinction attached to it. And it kind of is interesting when you dive into metal because the concept of when metal becomes too heavy is going to be in your own hands. What you define as being something that is too loud, that is too aggressive, that goes a bit past what you can enjoy as an art form, that is entirely going to be your decision to make. You can stop or start, as close to the beginning or end as you would want because there is no such thing as an event horizon because there's always going to be another heavier, louder project in the underground. You probably just don't even know it exists. But to me, the most interesting thing when you try to dissect and talk about noise and heaviness in music and where that line is really drawn is we consider noise and heaviness in metal to come from kind of like a spectrum. There is no real way to define it because on one hand you have noise metal, things that are deliberately trying to sound kind of like drone music, drone metal, like a la Sun or Earth, some of Boris's stuff. You have this really heavy focus on distortion, feedback, noise. It really feels like anti-music in many ways, devoid of any sort of logical progression, having abnormality as the major centerpiece that propels the music into what it is. These bands are actively trying to be anti-music and trying to challenge the conception of what music is considered, but you also have other noisy and heavy projects that lie on different parts of the spectrum but can equally be attached to these things of, well, it's just noise, it's not really music. Whether you're talking about a genre like brutal death metal, like a band like, say, Skinless or Dying Fetus, these bands that are so chunky and low-tuned and down-tuned and all that sort of thing, but the atypical fashion of writing melody or lack of melody in music can just as much be an art form as something that isn't, and we've sort of recontextualized what music really means over the years and decades as technology has increased increased, as instrumentation has increased, and people have kind of stepped forward to breach those boundaries. But on the other side of that coin, you have something like lo-fi black metal, which by definition a lot of times will have melody. It will have harmony in some way. A lot of the depressive black metal lo-fi artists do put that sort of emphasis on lonesomeness and coldness. They have this heartfelt realism and remorse to their music, so it fits the criteria of a progression of a melody, but it is instead the production that makes it feel like it's just noise to people that don't particularly like it. If you are too lo-fi, if you're like a paysage d'hiver, you kind of run into the issue where something is so dense and impenetrable and so just insulated in itself that people that don't particularly like that type of music can feel like it is just incomprehensible jibber jabber, but the people that dive into it will see that it does fit the criteria technically of what music is considered. Oftentimes I think that a lot of what people say kind of boils down to it's not music because I don't particularly like it or see the credence in it, but by definitional standpoints there has been a sort of redefining of certain types of genres and art forms, and whether or not you see it as classical music or not, number one doesn't not make it music, but to play devil's advocate and give the benefit of the doubt, if you don't think it's music, you gotta at least admit that it is a form of art, because if you want to translate this to any single other art form, it sounds absolutely idiotic to try to take down something just because it's going against the grain or is not something that fits the classical definition. When you look at like a lot of impressionistic painters, or when you look at the way that a lot of romanticists approach things in more of an imaginative way, or if you look at a lot of like avant-garde surrealist type of stuff, it's really interesting how different art forms have always kind of gotten this reputation where if you don't kind of follow the specific movements that you know you're trying to follow, that you're automatically kind of out of the club. And I think metal and just music as a whole could take a lot of hints from how art has been seen throughout the centuries, millenniums, because anytime a new movement comes around, it's not that it's necessarily just trying to go against like what came before it. Oftentimes it can be sort of like an anti that or a counterculture to the specific art form. It's also to take art in a new interesting direction to reflect some sort of feeling, and I think that is something that a lot of people forget with music, is music at the end of the day, it is to provoke some sort of feeling. While it is auditory and a lot of times like mindless pop music or that sort of thing, like it can be just like to listen to, and metal too, like there are plenty of metal bands that I can admit are not the greatest bands on the planet of Earth, but I just enjoy listening to them because they please my ears, they scratch my ears in the right way, and that's perfectly fine. At the end of the day, that's kind of what music is. But it is to promote some sort of reaction or an emotion, or to get a rise out of you in some way, positive, negative, to really bring out feelings in you. And even if rhythmatically or progressively some of these genres aren't necessarily fitting the classic definitions, they invoke those emotions in the same way. Lonesomeness, fear, anger, sadness, depression, anxiety. There are so many ways that noisy type of music can elicit reactions. It's just not the type of reactions that you usually associate with music. And whether or not you enjoy something or not is going to be a very personal experience, because the line, like I said at the start of the video, is always going to be subjective of where you sort of, you know, cut the point off of like what is too heavy, what is too noisy, what goes too far. That's for you to decide. And a lot of times you'll see like a desensitized numbness sort of form where over time, as you become more used to and accustomed to music of like an extreme variety, you will oftentimes clamor, or like a fucking drug, for something more extreme. You want to have that fix in a different facet. You want to be more experimental. You want to see where this genre can go, or many other genres, and that's oftentimes how metalheads will sort of go down the rabbit hole one right after another until they're lost in the depths of experimental music. And I think that is very telling of how challenging the conceptions of what you expect from music usually. It's always going to give you sort of whiplash when you don't know what to expect, and it goes against what you have in your head as what music should be, what you are used to. And when something challenges that, it's obviously going to be pretty abrupt and pretty jarring. But at the end of the day, enjoy what you want to enjoy. What are your guys' opinions of this topic? Where do you draw the line of metal and noise and distortion, all that sort of thing? What is too heavy for you? Do you think that certain metal isn't music? You can let me know down in the comment section below. There is no wrong answer. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.